who thought it was a good idea for the President of the United States? You had an agreement in principle already, your envoy meeting with Taliban leaders in Qatar, fine. Who thought it was a good idea for the President of the United States to meet with Taliban leaders who have the blood of thousands of Americans on their hands just 3 days before 9/11?
You know, we know the history of Camp David. We reflected on that as we were thinking about how to deliver for the American people. And so as we considered the right path forward, your point about an agreement in principle, I think that's true. We weren't complete. There's still lots of implementation issues, lots of technical issues that needed to be worked on, even though we'd been doing this for months. President Trump ultimately made the decision. He said, I want to talk to President Ghani. I want to talk to these Taliban negotiators. I want to look them in the eye. I want to see if we can get to the final outcome that we needed so that we could sign off on that deal. So we found that arrangement acceptable, that the verification was adequate, and we concluded this was a perfectly appropriate place. You know the history of Camp David. Lots of bad folks have come through that place. There's been lots of peace negotiations taking place. It's almost always the case, Chris, that you don't get to negotiate with good guys. The reason you're in negotiations to end wars, to end conflict, to end violence, to reduce risk to the American people is almost always because the person across the table from you isn't exactly the finest.
I don't usually like to play this game, but imagine for a second if Barack Hussein Obama invited the Taliban to a presidential retreat on the anniversary of 9/11. Maybe they'll ship in Hitler's casket so Trump can host him for a state dinner on the anniversary of D-Day. I mean, honestly, Republicans said Obama was un-American because he wore a tan suit, because he liked Dijon mustard. Can you imagine if he'd invited a terror organization into the United States on the 18th anniversary of the worst terror attack against the United States in modern American history, which the Taliban themselves helped facilitate? And honestly, I'm shocked that the same guy who bragged about having the tallest building in Lower Manhattan after the World Trade Center collapsed has now invited the Taliban to America on 9/11. Truly, never expected something like that from him. As if it's not already obvious, to give an idea of how inappropriate this is, consider that the Taliban, which was in power in Afghanistan during the time of the September 11th attack, had given safe haven to Osama bin Laden, who, as part of al-Qaeda, was responsible for the attacks. And while the Taliban publicly denounced the 9/11 attacks, they also refused to extradite bin Laden to the United States. So because the Bush Doctrine states that we make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them, a US-led military campaign overthrew the Taliban in 2001. The same Taliban that Trump invited to his presidential retreat on the anniversary of the worst attack in modern American history, for which they were at least in part responsible. And yes, I know I've repeated that, but I feel like it's important. And despite the fact that 18 years has passed, little has changed. The Taliban came out only weeks ago justifying the September 11th attacks with a video online, the narration of which said, "This heavy slap on their dark faces was the consequence of their interventionist policies and not our doing." And this was in July. In 2019. These are the people that the America First president just bestowed the honor of an invite to the presidential retreat. It used to be that the United States didn't negotiate with terrorists, but don't take that from me. I believe it was Donald Trump who said in 2014 that the US cannot negotiate with terrorists, that it'll only lead to disaster. I believe it was also Trump in 2012 who said that Barack Obama is negotiating with our sworn enemy, the Taliban, who facilitated 9/11. I believe it was Trump in 2012 who said that President Obama has begun meeting with the Taliban and building trust. The Taliban supported 9/11. And I believe it was Trump in 2012 who called it pathetic that Obama is sweetening his offer to the Taliban before using it as an opportunity to hawk the book that he stuck his name on. I'll tell you what, if nothing else, it looks like Donald Trump is really opposed to the idea of negotiating with terrorists, the Taliban in particular, and felt like the fact that they'd helped facilitate 9/11 was a pretty important factor in that decision. So I feel like it'd be safe to say that of all weekends to host the Taliban for a special visit on US soil, that Donald Trump would have some strong feelings about what weekends not to do it. Now, let me be crystal clear. This is not to say that peace isn't a good thing, but like everything else that this administration touches, it is absolute humiliation, misstep after misstep, every step of the way. Trump's approach to diplomacy is so marred by his own insatiable desire for credit and adulation that he can't get out of his own way. And you'd think that he'd have realized this by now, but levying threats via Twitter doesn't work. It has the opposite effect because A, countries are not going to be shamed into doing what the United States says, and B, we don't even have the support from the international community because Trump has threatened them too. We see this time and time again, including his ongoing trade war with China. His efforts may have been well-meaning at their their core, but the execution has arguably hurt us more than the issue he was initially trying to resolve. And so now we're in a situation where we obviously didn't see the benefit of peace talks, and we suffer the humiliation of having invited the Taliban into our country on the anniversary of 9/11. That is objectively a lose-lose situation, or as Trump might call it, the art of the deal. So Trump's sycophants can try and do the Sunday talk show circuit to put out yet another fire, but it's become obvious that the fires will never stop. This president is, at worst, a clear and present danger to this country. But even at his best, even while he's trying to negotiate peace, he's an absolute embarrassment.